Hi everyone, welcome to the F1 Time Portal, a Formula One history podcast started by two Formula One super nerds. I'm your super nerd Rosa.
And I'm your Hit the Road Jack host Luigi. And today we're taking you back to the 1961 season. So let's go.
Hey, hello, we're back. Not Hit the Road Jack. Is that one of your favourite songs, Louis?
No, what I did was I looked up what was the number one songs of 61. And Hit the Road Jack was one of the big songs of that year. So I thought, it's a song that I knew. And I figured if I knew it, most people would know it, right?
Yeah. Did you mean to sort of have a bit of a pun with the hitting the road and this is like a Formula One podcast? Or
I tried to find that link.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Like,
that's good. That's good. I like it.
I'm not going to pick a boring love song, am I?
No. Okay. So 1961, we have a new formula coming into effect this season. It was actually announced back in 1958 by I know we've said this before, we're calling it the FIA, but I think in this period they were actually called the Commission Sportive Internationale, or CSI, which is, to me, it's very funny that they're CSI.
Yeah, it's like CSI Miami.
Yeah, exactly.
All those TV shows. Yeah.
Yes. We've got some new rule changes.
Yeah, and I mean, this is like the change. It's just like in modern day Formula One. They gave lots of notice, actually. They announced their rules in 58 for 61.
Yes.
And that's sort of what they did. Like, we're currently in 2024. We know there's big rule changes coming in 26.
Yes,
and
exactly.
They made that announcement a couple of years ago. So they give the teams lots of notice. So let's give CSI credit. They did give notice.
Yes, they did. And the British teams protested the changes to the point of threatening a boycott.
You know, it's interesting that they did that, because I can understand why they protested, because they found so much success in the 2.5 litre era, and it really put them on the map in dethroning all the big Italian teams, and the rules were changing on them. But they did have a lot of notice.
Yes. You
know what it shows, though? It shows they had a real deeper confidence that they could change it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, they were so confident that their protests would be upheld that they found themselves in all sorts of trouble when they finally realised that their arguments wasn't going to change anything, and so they were totally unprepared for the changes.
Yeah. And you know what? This shows that the CSI are no different to the FIA. They rarely cave in or back down. It's in the DNA of their organisation. So we see maybe the strategy blunders of Ferrari in the DNA of Ferrari, and in the DNA of the FIA, we've got a deep stubbornness that's not going to move. But in this case, I'm actually on their side, which is very rare.
It is rare. Are you okay? What's going on?
Yeah.
So
I think if you give people 3 years notice, come on.
Yeah, exactly.
You can complain, but do the work in the background in parallel. Don't be down one path only, you know? Things change.
So essentially, and like I said, we're not technical, we're not going to go through this in much detail, but essentially the Formula 2 rules, which were raced from 1957 to 1960, was made the new Grand Prix formula with a couple of tweaks. So the engine capacity was limited to 1,500 cc's. There was a minimum weight for cars, and it was reduced to 450 kilograms from 500 kilograms. Louis, what do cars weigh today?
Oh yeah, it's a good point. I think they're about 700 or 800. It's like it's right up. There's double the weight.
Yeah,
and probably triple the size.
Yes. So we knew that commercial fuel had been introduced a few years ago, but that commercial fuel is still there, and self-starting was now compulsory. So no longer were the cars have to be push-started by the mechanics or started by mechanics. Drivers had to start them. So,
yeah, the interesting thing about that is the FIA basically got so upset with people getting push starts needing to be black flagged. They said, damn it, we're putting it in the rules now.
Yeah, that's right. Another interesting one is that they weren't allowed to fill their oil during the race. So we've heard so many times when people had to come in to the pits for more oil. So
I think They mean fuel, right? Fuel.
No, oil, not fuel, oil.
Oh, it is oil.
No
Okay.
oil filling. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And interestingly, rollover bars fitted to form a hoop over the driver's head and strong enough to support the weight of the car overturning is also now a compulsory requirement.
No, I'm not sure I heard right there, Rosa. Like, Rosa, are you feeling all right? Because did you just say something that sounded like a safety feature?
Yes.
It's
yes,
crazy.
I did.
What gave these? I don't know, FIA, CIA, CSI, I don't care.
Yeah.
Let's call them FIA. What gave the FIA such a crazy idea? Why would they consider safety? Where's this coming from?
I don't know. Maybe because they were losing so many drivers due to preventable accidents, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a first step, but what about so many other steps? What about stopping the race? You get what I mean? Like,
I know. It's
why
huge.
did they start here?
I know. I was very surprised when I read that. And it's sort of like it's as revolutionary as the Halo now, I guess, back in those days, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but it probably didn't get as much attention as the Halo got.
No, it probably didn't.
That had a lot of resistance. But, one thing I was going to mention about these changes, so actually, to be honest, we're obviously being sarcastic. It's awesome that they're introducing these safety features finally, but they've still got a long way to go. But one thing you mentioned was essentially they're adopting the Formula 2 standard for Formula 1. Now, the last time they did this, it was the end of 51 because Alpha pulled out. They didn't have enough teams.
That's right, yes.
And I'm telling you now, in the Facebook groups that I'm in, people get quite emotional.
Yes,
they say, it's not Formula 1. It's not Formula 1. And I'm like, well, it sort of is, because if they replace it with the Formula 2, then the existing Formula 2 doesn't exist anymore. It becomes Formula 1.
And there's another Formula 2 competition that comes out of that as well.
Yeah.
So I know. It is confusing, but and it says that, the Formula 2 rules were adopted with a couple of tweaks to make Formula 1. So that's it's Formula 1, everyone. Yeah. Live with it. And if you're going to argue with me about it online, that's fine. But I'm just going to say everything is Formula 2 since 1952. Well, I was just to say, then we're still in Formula 2 now.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. We're still in Formula 2 from 52. And in fact, now that we've gone back to Formula 2 again in 61, it's Formula 3.
Oh, no.
Because it's gone back another step. So we're in Formula 3 right now.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
So the British teams argued that these rules would slow down the cars, make the races really dull and monotonous. But actually, it was the anxiety over the increasing speeds and fatal accidents that actually prompted the FIA to make these changes.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the FIA achieved their aim, though, because the 60s was still a very dangerous period to be in a race car. And I wonder if they'll apply a rule that races are stopped when spectators or drivers are killed, some of the basics, or seriously injured. So just flagging that.
Yeah, I know. And as we've seen, some of the rules, even today, we see brought in to have a certain effect, don't actually have that effect. So, it is interesting. So anyway, while the British teams were whinging, am I allowed to say that? British whingers?
The last time I looked, British listeners were about 7% of our listeners. So, yes, you can while it's low.
Yeah, okay. So,
all nations are whingers, just so you know. It's not
Look, and we said we can understand why they were doing it. They were winning. Yeah. They were on top. So, anyway, while they were trying to get the rules changed, guess who got on with preparing for the new Formula rules, Luigi? Guess.
Judging by the excitement in your voice, it must have been Ferrari.
Yes. And what a car they developed. They developed the Tipo 156, affectionately dubbed Sharknose, because of the way it was designed at the front. It had like these characteristic air intake nostrils. So,
It's an iconic car that some say is one of the most beautiful racing cars ever, but they're probably Ferrari fans.
I think it's beautiful.
It is a beautiful car. And you know that none of the original cars exist today. The ones you see around today are replicas. The story goes that every engineer who worked on the development of the car left the team at the end of 61. We'll get to that in 62. There's a bit of a walkout, which is ridiculous. So Enzo, in his fury, had all the cars destroyed, like actually scrapped.
Oh, that is so heartbreaking.
Yeah, and let's not forget he didn't have much nostalgia connection with his cars. He used them as parts. At the best of times, that's what he did, let alone when he's angry.
So I'm not going to go into all the technical details about the car, except to say that the design did go against Enzo Ferrari's dislike of mid-engine cars and his old-fashioned belief that mid-engine cars were built by people who didn't have enough horsepower.
I love that. He's so brutal, isn't he?
Yeah.
And they had to do it in secret from him.
Well, I can only imagine that they did. Like, I don't know. That's a bit of poetic license on my behalf. But so they've ended up with this car that Enzo didn't actually believe in philosophically. But, yeah.
That's very funny. And as I mentioned at the end of the 1960 episode, this is the car that actually features on our F1 Time Portal podcast design. So if you check our website or the icon of this podcast you're listening to right now, that is the 1961 156 Ferrari Sharknose. It looks awesome, and that's why we chose it, because it had a nice... It really shows some of the uniqueness of the designs, and it's visually obvious. Unlike, say, some of Colin Chapman's designs are really awesome, but they don't look so visually obvious. That's why we chose this one.
And the W196, the Streamliner version, just looked like a sports car. It doesn't actually look like a Formula One car. It was so different, wasn't it?
It was too different for us to use. People would think we were a sports car podcast, which we're not.
Yeah. So, as we said, BRM and Cooper were very unprepared and even resorted to using last year's really heavy chassis for their car. Colin Chapman, however, produced his Lotus 21, which is even more sleek and compact than the 18, and it put the driver in an even more reclined position, with a number of teams using this model with the Coventry Climax engine. Although the engine wouldn't be ready until later in the season for some teams. Due to, of all things, Luigi, the increasing influence of sponsors conflict between, do you remember Esso? Remember the fuel company Esso?
Do they still exist?
I don't know. They've
probably been bought out.
Yeah, they're bought out. So, so Esso and BP. Esso and BP were having a big fight over their teams and the supply of petrol, and so they blocked the supply of petrol to the Rob Walker team.
That's going to make the cars go slower.
Okay, so Porsche back this year after a successful F2 campaign last year with Dan Gurney.
You know, the interesting thing is, I had to look it up. Like, when did Porsche start Formula One? And they started in 57. But why do some of these manufacturer teams come in and go all the time?
Yeah, I don't know.
And I mean, okay, I'm maybe exaggerating when I say all the time, but it just seems a bit frustrating. It must be frustrating for the fans and the drivers. Like, who do I commit to? Who's going to hang around for the long time? So, again, a tip of the hat to Ferrari, because Ferrari had quite a lot of lean years in their history, and they stuck it out. They didn't just withdraw like the other teams. So I give them a lot of credit for that. So that's why they get that extra special money payment from the FIA, because they've got such heritage and history, and they didn't just dip in and out all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So on to the drivers. Drivers that we're going to focus on this season include Moss, of course. He's driving for the Rob Walker team. Phil Hill, the American, and Richie Ginther. Is Richie Ginther American as well? I think he is. I'm pretty sure he is. Yeah,
I'll just double check.
Yeah, I think they're both American, and so they're in the Ferrari alongside Wolfgang von Trips. Tony Brooks and Graham Hill are driving for BRM. Jack Brabham and Bruce McLaren are teammates again. I reckon this is the third year that they're teammates again for Cooper. And Jim Clark is driving for Team Lotus. And unfortunately, he's going to be relegated somewhat to the support cast, as they are very uncompetitive, their car this year.
I found this Sorry, go on.
So, we're not going to mention him a lot, unfortunately, unless something big happens to him.
And I will say, I found reading this season hard to swallow in some respects because I know how awesome Jim Clark is.
Mm.
And it shows even when you've got an awesome driver, if you put them in a bit of a crappy car, they don't do much.
No.
And it's not a criticism of Jim Clark whatsoever. It's just a reflection of that car must have been well below average.
Yeah. He's just nowhere in the races. It's surprising to me too.
So there's big news there too. I can finally report that the Indy 500 is no longer part of the Formula One Championship. It's gone. It never made sense in being part of Formula One. It had a different set of drivers, different set of regulations, even clashed on occasion with an F1 race.
That's hilarious. That is so funny.
We had to waste so much time pretending not to talk about it. And now we don't have to talk about it anymore. But funnily enough, it does come back later in a different sort of way, but you'll see.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we've got a change in the points as well. The winner is now given 9 points for the World Drivers' Championship. So it's 9, 6, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And this means a lot to me. When I read this, I was like, oh, wow, because when I started watching Formula One in 87, so yes, I'm not young, despite my really young voice, just so you know. do people have young voices? I don't know. Does that exist?
I do now. You do. You sound 27, Luigi.
Yeah, excellent. That's exactly what I want. That's what I'm working on. I'm going to a voice coach, not for singing, but to sound young. But when I started in 87, that's what the points were. 9, 6, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh,
and it's funny to see it started right here in 1961.
Yeah.
And I don't know when it changed. It changed maybe 10, 15 years ago from 24, so probably 2010 or thereabouts.
Okay.
But that 9, 6, 4, 3, 2, 1, that stuck.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Well, last year they took away the point for the fastest lap, and this year they just added a point to the 9. So, it's now that's what we have until the 80s.
Yeah. And beyond.
And beyond, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we ready for our first race?
We are ready.
Okay, so race 1 is Monaco Grand Prix. It's the 14th of May. It's still on the Monaco Street Circuit. And look, we're not going to go into how many times. I think the Monaco Street Circuit does change a little bit over the years, but we haven't really captured that. Unless something big happens, we're not going to go into it too much. But there's 100 laps here and there's 16 drivers and the grid formation is 3 by 2 by 3. So as usual, only 16 starters were allowed to qualify for the race.
And that's very interesting to hear that because remember the 1960 race, they also had the same rule, only 16 drivers allowed to start. They only had 4 cars finish. So I guess what I'm trying to say is impressive that you're learning Monaco and you continue to limit it to 16 drivers because it's ridiculous. Come on, put more on.
They did even more than that. The organisers changed the rules again this year, giving each of the 5 works teams, so each are like the constructor teams, a guaranteed place on the grid, as were Moss and Trintignant as past winners.
Wow. So 1, no champagne for the fastest lap. And 2, thanks, Monaco, for making it even a bit more complicated unnecessarily.
Yeah. So that only left 4 places for the remaining 9 drivers to fight over. And what I think would happen is that, I don't know, I reckon it would take some of the, I don't know. Part of me thinks it would take some of the zing out of qualifying and part of me thinks it would make it more important for some teams, but not the big teams. Like the big teams are on there. They don't have to worry so much. They have to worry about a place, but yeah.
I know. It just makes
it's just
it's
weird.
Interesting. It's just weird. I get it. It makes the teams determine who is their number 1.
Yes.
It probably causes friction within the team.
Yes. So Moss set the fastest lap in his old Lotus, his old shape Lotus for Rob Walker, and Ginther in the Ferrari 2nd, and Jim Clark for Team Lotus 3rd. So Phil and Graham Hill lined up alongside each other on the 2nd row. Brabham qualified in last place, being more preoccupied with qualifying for the Indy 500 and being sure of a place on the grid, settled for a slow lap.
That is Brabham, what are you doing? Indy, really? You know, you're not only the defending double world champion, and this time Indy's not even worth points, where it was just last year. I don't know what I tried to work out what was worse, that it was a defending champion essentially missing, or that he's going to IndyCar when it's not worth points for the first time since 1950.
Yeah,
You know?
I couldn't really find why he wanted to go to the Indy race, but yeah, he was determined to go there and race. So
Yeah. Mm.
anyway, so on race day, Ginther took the lead, followed by Clark and Moss.
Yeah, the interesting thing on this, at the start of this race, was just before the start, one of Moss's chassis tubes was seen to be cracked, and without a second thought, one of the mechanics from the Rob Walker team produced his welding kit and set to work on fixing it on the starting grid. So another team mechanic, and his torch was essentially inches from the fuel tank of Moss's car.
Wow.
So he fixed the issue, and Moss ran the race with side panels removed to assist with cooling the cockpit. So that's pretty amazing.
It is.
And I think he was very lucky.
Yes.
On two fronts. One, that the car didn't go up and explode on the grid.
I reckon.
Yeah, no doubt killing Moss, the mechanic, and many others. And secondly, that the thing was actually repaired. So, wow.
Wow. Yes. So we have Moss and Clark, but Clark then slipped back many laps, having to pit with his fuel pump shorting and needing new plugs. So by lap 14, Moss overtakes Ginther's Ferrari, and so does Bonnier in the Porsche. Phil Hill also is in a Ferrari in fourth place. So after 35 laps, Moss's lead was out to about 10 seconds, followed by Bonnier and the three Ferraris of Phil Hill, Ginther and Von Trips. Phil Hill eventually overtook Bonnier for second, but couldn't catch Moss. Ginther then also overtook Bonnier on lap 41 and tried to keep up with Phil Hill, his teammate, who was now closing the gap to Moss. On lap 60, there was less than 3 seconds between the Lotus and the three Ferraris. At this point, Bonnier's engines cut out and the other Ferrari of Von Trips took fourth place.
It's really interesting, this race, because at this stage, we don't know which is the dominant car of the year. And Moss is taking his old four-cylinder Lotus in the front and taking charge of this race, but being hunted by those three Sharknose Ferraris with those massive V6 engines. This is very lucky for Moss. Another bit of luck for Moss that this is Monaco, where speed isn't as big a deal, perhaps.
Yeah, it isn't that much of an advantage, is it? So Moss was now pulling out all the stops to stay in front, and clever driving, lapping tail enders meant that he stretched his lead a little. On lap 75, Ginther overtakes Hill to take second and puts in a fastest lap to close the gap to Moss to 3 seconds. Moss then also set another fastest lap, and although Ginther pressed Moss crossed the finish line 3.6 seconds ahead of the Ferrari, Ginther second and Phil Hill third.
Yeah, I think this is a really impressive drive by Moss in a much less powerful car. And really that win was due to his skill as a driver around the streets of Monaco. And I did read that he said it was one of the most satisfying wins of his career, both at the time in a weaker car and in hindsight, because it turns out that this Ferrari is clearly the peak car of the season. So it's a double amazing win.
Yep.
So to the championship, pretty straightforward because it's the first race. Moss leading with 9 points, Ginther second on 6, Phil Hill third with 4 points, and then Von Trips with 3 points. So it's interesting to see that no Ferrari rules seem to be in place, and Ginther's the number one Ferrari driver temporarily. In terms of constructor, we've got Lotus Climax leading, even though Moss is in the Rob Walker team. It's classified as Lotus for some reason.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Ferrari second with 6, and Porsche with 2 points because Dan Gurney did get 2 points in the Porsche.
Good on him. Okay, off we go to the Dutch Grand Prix, race 2 of 8. It's May the 22nd. We're at Zandvoort again, 75 laps, 15 drivers on a 3x2x3 grid. So this is only 1 week after Monaco teams. After Monaco. So the teams have to hurry to Zandvoort to be ready for practice on the Saturday. The Ferraris were missing for the first session, but appeared for the second session with all 3 cars powered by the new 120-degree V6 engines.
It's like the way you say that. It's like they're making this special grand entrance in a teen movie where the football star is unveiled. So it's almost like the Ferraris come along. They've purposely take the back cover of the Ferraris off so everyone can see the shiny engines.
That's right.
They've probably got some special glistening spray on it. It pity they didn't have ghetto blasters back then, because I'm sure they would have had music pumping, probably some fancy sort of Italian operatic, dramatic music. Yeah.
Yeah, it is funny how they decided to make an entrance with their big engines.
Mm.
So handling problems, though, affected their times at first, but during third practice, the Ferraris locked out all 3 spots on the front row of the grid, with Phil Hill and Von Tripp setting the same time of 1 minute 35.7 seconds and Ginther only 0.2 of a second behind. So on race day, Von Tripp leapt into the lead with Phil Hill right behind him, but Ginther made a poor start.
You mean a nonsense start?
It was actually a really nonsense start because he's now 7th.
It's a medium nonsense start.
Yeah.
I think proper nonsense means you go from front row to, say, double digits.
Yeah.
Last is a classic nonsense, but at least 10th back. Yes. At least you lost 10 positions. But 7th, it still gets the word nonsense, but not a heavily emotive one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So behind the 2 Ferraris, Graham Hill in the BRM was trying desperately to stay in front of Clark, but on lap 4, Clark got past and set after Phil Hill. Clark eventually got past Phil Hill. I have to say Phil Hill, don't I? Because I've got Graham Hill here on lap 17, only to be repassed on the straight. This happened over and over. The Lotus quicker through the corners, but losing the advantage to the Ferrari on the straights. And behind them, the same thing was happening with Moss and Ginther, with Brabham joining in for a while too. Brabham, though, couldn't keep up with the Lotus and Ferraris and dropped off the back of the fight. By lap 27, Moss and Ginther got past Graham Hill, and when Graham Hill took the scenic route on a corner, Brabham then got past him too.
This is like some amazing classic racing with cars exploiting very different strengths to gain advantage. We've got a situation here. We've got speed versus handling, which is quite different to today's cars, I think. Mm. But despite Clark being in that very average car, he's battling it out with a Ferrari.
Yeah. Mm. So his Lotus, though, lost some handling as the fuel load became lighter. It's so interesting that they needed fuel to sort of keep it balanced. But anyway, so Phil Hill consolidated his lead in second place, Clark now third. The battle for fourth, though, was still raging, and on the last lap, Moss slipped past Ginther's Ferrari at the hairpin, only for the Ferrari to pull back alongside on the straight. At the finish line, Moss took it by a wheel.
That is really, really impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what a finish and what an amazing start, because this race is memorable for 2 things, and this is going to be in a trivia night. If F1 Time Portal ever does do a trivia night, this is one of the questions I'll definitely ask, because even I was amazed by this statistic. In 1961, the Dutch Grand Prix is the first race, and I suspect maybe the only race, where there were no retirements and not a single car made a pit stop.
Wow. They didn't, did they?
Everything was on the track. Everything you could see on the track.
Okay.
No retirements, no pit stops. That's never going to happen.
I know. Okay.
I mean, especially when 2024, we've got drivers like Stroll and Sargent. Yes. Those guys own the retirement field.
That's right.
And they're normally causing them with their own errors. So, yeah. Sorry, guys. Sorry about those US and Canadian fans.
Okay, so how are we standing then on the championships?
Okay, so we've got Sterling Moss leading with 12 points. Von Trips is equal first on 12 points, but classified as second because I think of Moss's victories. Phil Hill is third with 10. And Ginther with 8. In terms of the constructors, we've got Ferrari leading on 14 points, and I think we're going to see that settling in now. And then we've got Lotus second on 12.
Okay, so we might leave it there after that very exciting race, and we'll come back next week with the continuation of 1961.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye. We have a Patreon.
Yay, we're a professional podcast now. So it means a lot to us if you are able to support the F1 Time Portal podcast.
For a small monthly fee, you not only get ad-free podcast content, you will also receive special episodes that are exclusively uploaded for our Patreon financial supporters.
We promise at least 2 additional exclusive episodes each month aligned to the decade we are up to in the show.
And you will also be able to make suggestions about any special episodes you may want us to research and present. We can't promise that we can do all of them, but we will consider them.
So, if that sounds like an entertainment bargain to you, go and sign up at patreon.com/F1 Time Portal today.
If you're enjoying our podcast, please tell your friends and non-F1 friends alike.
Yeah, and don't forget to rate us 5 stars or whatever highest is available on the podcast platform that you use.
We have a range of social media handles for you to connect with fellow listeners, so look up F1 Time Portal on all the usual platforms.
Or visit us at www.f1timeportal.com or email us at f1timeportal@gmail.com.
We would like to give credit to our primary reference materials, a series of books called Grand Prix by Mike Lang.
We also use many other written and digital references, which are in our show notes.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you.